Gamecock Club Hour yesterday, and I just was looking. I knew it was Valentine's Day weekend, but I wanted to make sure I got the date right. It is Friday, February 14th, first game against Sacred Heart, and I saw it was 4 o'clock pitch, and I was like, oh, that's right. They play all the evening games early in the season because you don't want to be playing at night when it's going to be 30 degrees. So the first 3 weeks of the season, we're going to have mid-afternoon games, basically.
Yeah, it's I never thought about it that way with it being just chilly out. Yeah, but I enjoy the midday games, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm ready for baseball to get here.
I prefer games starting no later than 7 o'clock. They played that 8 o'clock game
against
Georgia, because it was like on ESPN or ESPN2 or something like that, and that game took like 4 hours.
Oh, yeah, especially with how much offense there was in that series. I mean, look, it's not good when the games start that late. So I don't know how we do it here on the West Coast with the 10 o'clock starts and stuff.
And that's kind of the crazy thing once we turn over to the new calendar, obviously wrapping up, college football here in a couple weeks, NFL playoffs going on, but, basketball's in full swing as we get into conference play, and then boom, we're right into the thick of baseball season here in a month. So this is when you, as we've talked about, get really busy from crisscrossing and going from one sport to the next and put a lot of miles on the car.
Yeah. Hopefully not that many left to go until baseball season. I think next time I'll travel now is Georgia, so we'll see.
We'll dive plenty into basketball coming up here in a couple minutes, but plenty of football to get to as the transfer portal and things with NIL continue to roll on. We'll get to that in just a moment, but it is 9 o'clock. Got to kick things off with a little Sandstorm Pick-Me-Up.
Time to get hyped.
Here's your 9 a.m. Sandstorm.
Sponsored by George Sink Injury Lawyers. Just call all nines.
It is time for your 9 a.m. Sandstorm Pick-Me-Up, brought to you by South Carolina's largest injury law firm, George Sink Injury Lawyers. If you've been hurt in the car or at work, call George Sink now at 803 all nines. We're in the midst of plenty of news with the transfer portal, and yesterday we got something pretty quickly on the Razul Fajan front as he had made his visit to South Carolina just a couple days ago and officially commits to the Gamecocks out of Utah State. And he's somebody that we did talk about a little bit yesterday, right just under 1,200 yards rushing this past season, 8 touchdowns, somebody that's not necessarily a speedster, but somebody that can make you miss. His missed tackles forced right up there with what Rocket Sanders had this past year, and seems to be a good piece to add to the backfield that already has Oscar Attaway, Jordan Howell, and Matthew Fuller.
Yeah, 69 missed tackles forced last season, and he had 10 missed tackles forced against Boise State and Wyoming last season, and that is that's really impressive right there. And this is a guy that has been on quite the journey. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's JUCO, Marshall, JUCO, Utah State, now South Carolina. That's wild.
Yeah, and so as of right now, I believe he only has the 1 year of eligibility, but if the Diego Pavia thing continues to push in the direction we think it's going to, could potentially have extra eligibility if they rule the JUCO thing not counting against your eligibility at the FBS level.
Which would be really great because, South Carolina going into after next year, they're going to be losing, Attaway and Fajan. And then that leaves you with Fuller and Howell and then whoever else you get running back. So, if you can get these guys back I'm not saying you're going to get Attaway back for an 8th year in 2026, but you can get a guy like Fajan back.
You never know.
Listen, there's always something out there to kind of justify bringing, getting a guy another year of eligibility. So
that brings you up to basically 4 running backs in the running back room. And I would guess maybe you get one more if available. And we say you go out and get someone. That's not always a guarantee. I remember 2 years ago, we thought they were going to for sure get somebody else and just didn't end up happening. It all depends on who's available and who wants to come and play for your school. I still think you don't have a firm RB1, right? You have 3 proven capable guys, and then one guy, Matthew Fuller, who we just have not seen a lot of yet, but somebody that they're very high on and we think will work his way into the rotation. But compared to what you had this past season, like we knew when Rocket Sanders committed, oh, there's your RB1. And, yeah, these other guys are going to get touches. Oscar Attaway obviously, played the relief role at running back and obviously stepped up when he needed to when Sanders was injured or when he opted out of the bowl game. But you don't have a clear-cut guy in that room right now that we think is going to get 70% of the carries.
No, I don't think they have a clear-cut guy either, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. The good news is you have a bunch of guys that are very capable of morphing into that RB1, at least in my opinion. Like we saw Oscar Attaway in the bowl game have to step in for Rocket, and he goes for over 100 all-purpose yards. So he's definitely more than capable of doing something like that consistently. Like he's a big power running back, in my opinion, that it may not have the flashiest speed, but again, maybe like a Fajan here, he's a guy that can get on the ground, get down field and just run over guys and whatnot. And I feel the same way here. I really like what Fajan did at Utah State in his 2 seasons there. So it seems like a good fit, and we'll see how it works out. It's not like the Rocket Sanders home run type of what you could get. Like this is a guy that 2 years ago for Rocket was nearly a 1,400 yard rusher. So maybe not the same thing, but I feel like with everything they have, more than one guy could be that type of player. Well,
and with Rocket, of course, he was coming over from Arkansas and was legitimately one of the best running backs in the SEC in the season he was healthy prior to coming here. With a guy like Fajan, same thing with Oscar Attaway, same thing with Jordan Howell. There's always going to be that question of, okay, how does that translate to the SEC? Because it's one thing to run for 1,200 yards in the Mountain West. It's another thing to do something like that in the SEC. I'm not saying they're not capable of it. Again, we've seen plenty out of Oscar Attaway and small things out of Jordan Howell that show you, okay, these guys are good enough to play at this level. And, again, the same questions are going to be posed about Fajan until he comes in here and proves it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, most definitely. And I think people will see that this guy could be very good for South Carolina. I mean, we haven't seen him suit up in a game yet, but just seeing how the numbers look and how many tackles he's missed and stuff and seeing some of the highlights, like he looks like a very good fit. And again, he was one of the top portal running backs out there. And the fact that South Carolina is able to bring one of those guys in, especially after missing on a guy like Justice Haynes to Michigan, I think this is a nice addition and one that could serve South Carolina well.
Elsewhere, just as important as the transfer portal is the guys that you are retaining. As announced yesterday that Mazeo Bennett Jr. did sign a new NIL deal with the Garnet Trust and will be returning for his second season at South Carolina. He's somebody that we knew the wide receiver room was very much wide open this year because we didn't have an established number one guy going into the year. And Mazeo Bennett very quickly early on in the season really stepped up and showed people what he was capable of, and really I think was the standout of this room this year. And in terms of guys returning, he'll be your leading returning receiver in terms of receptions going into 2025.
Yeah, I think Mazeo could be a guy that, as if he didn't take a huge step this season, I think he takes a bigger one next year because, look, kind of down the stretch, I felt like Mazeo didn't get the same amount of production as he maybe did earlier in the year. And maybe my feelings on that are not the same as everyone else, but
I think Harvard maybe took some targets away.
That's what I'm kind of saying. Like it wasn't that Mazeo wasn't doing anything. I just felt like his production was probably a little bit more tame and quiet, kind of as the season went along. And but I think he's definitely a guy that you needed to get back. And with him already having a year under his belt as an SEC wide receiver, a pretty decent one at that for South Carolina, I feel like he's going to be able to help out those guys that are coming in this year, all the freshmen they have, and kind of mentor them through what the season's going to be like.
And when you have a young guy that comes in and has the level of production in a spot like receiver, they're going to continue to get better. It's like, okay, here's where you are. You're number one. Year number 2, you take another step forward. Year number 3, and so on and so forth. So another full off season. And here's the thing too. I can't remember if he was an early enrollee. He probably was, to where he got to come in the spring. But you also had just this rotation of wide receiver coaches for a little bit. Finally, you settled on Mike Furry, and obviously he's done a really good job in his full year here. But another off season, working with him through the spring, working on things in the summer, working on things in fall camp. By the time the Virginia Tech game rolls around in 230 some odd days, how much further along and further developed is Mazeo Bennett going to be?
And I think it's going to be the same for all the receivers. Like you mentioned the point about Furry, like him being here for a full year is going to be, a full fresh season is going to be great. And it's the same deal with the offensive coordinator situation too. Like Mike Shula is going to only have more time from here to figure out what he wants to do with the offense moving forward. And I think you got the pieces out there to make it happen. And it's good to get a guy like Mazeo back though, for sure. I'm expecting good things out of him in 2025.
One more thing from the transfer portal front: AJ Parks, the reserve offensive tackle for South Carolina, did hit the transfer portal officially yesterday. He's somebody that had transferred last year from Oklahoma, dealt with some injuries leading up to the season, and don't believe found his way onto the field at any point this year. Again, we talked, there's so many bodies in the offensive line room. Maybe he didn't see a pathway for himself finding his way to the field this year either. Again, it's one less guy in the room, but here's an opportunity to supplement it by bringing somebody else in the portal, as Carolina's already brought in 3 offensive linemen to this point anyway. So I don't view this as anything detrimental necessarily. I think it qualifies with healthy transfers because, again, he had not found his way onto the field this past year, and injuries did play a part in that, and now seeking an opportunity to find some playing time elsewhere.
Yeah, he was just banged up this year, and I don't think he would have seen much playing time to begin with just because of who was out there playing. But, yeah, I remember seeing him suit up during practice and stuff when we were out there for bowl work out in Orlando, and I'm sure he was healthy by that point. But, yeah, it's a situation where it just didn't work for him, and you wish him all the best moving forward. Hope he finds a good home.
Some of the football headlines from the day coming up tonight. Huge basketball game for the men. We'll dive into some of the specifics of that as they get set to take on a top-ranked or a highly-ranked Alabama team coming into Colonial Life Arena. That's coming up next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Felcher along with you on your Wednesday on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler and Jack Belcher along with you on your Wednesday here on the game. Tonight, tip-off at 7 o'clock, pregame coverage at 6:30. Men's basketball taking on number 5 Alabama. You can listen to that here on the game in Columbia, as well as 100.3 The Game out in Myrtle Beach. Jack, what's your confidence level for Lamont Paris's crew going into this game tonight? Because last time we saw them, it was pretty ugly out there in Starkville.
Yeah, it was a little bit rough over the weekend. I'm not super high on what's going to happen tonight, but again, I've been proven wrong, and I kind of hope I am tonight. Like this SEC slate is still so new for South Carolina that they can make it better rather quickly here. Like a win changes everything. How you feel?
And I'll say this, and when you look at the first couple of days of conference play, home teams have fared a lot better than road teams. And going on the road to any SEC environment, no matter what team it is always going to be challenging. Tennessee looked like the worst team in all of college basketball, last night on the road. Kentucky lost on the road at Georgia last night. So having that number next to your name is certainly scary, but we know Carolina played really great against Clemson at home just a couple weeks ago, and that's something that Nate Oates referenced, and we'll get to that in just a little bit when previewing the South Carolina team. They're capable. I think playing at Colonial Life Arena does give you a little something that going on the road doesn't.
Yeah, I think for sure. Like, look, I think Alabama's also taken the right approach here. Like I've seen some of what Nate Oates had to say leading into this game and stuff, and it's like like he knows Lamont Paris is going to have this crew ready to go. Like, make no mistake about it. Like we'll see what happens, and we haven't talked to any of those guys since the game out in Starkville, but I'm sure they're going to be ready to go for this game. And look, they're not going to have Miles Studi for quite a bit as he's out indefinitely with a blood clot issue, and that's definitely a big loss because he's been a starter for South Carolina, but gives other guys an opportunity to step up. And I think someone like a Zach Davis could really benefit from this, probably being the starter in there tonight, plugged in. And, that's what it's going to need to be.
And I think you look at what Alabama's schedule is as well. They had the big victory over Oklahoma on Saturday, ending their undefeated run to start the season. And they've got 3 ranked opponents after South Carolina. They go to Texas A&M, they play Ole Miss, and they go to Kentucky. So 3 very big games after they take on South Carolina coming up tonight. And Nate Oates, let's get into some cuts here, Dave. Cut number 15, head coach for men's basketball over there at Alabama, talked about not looking past South Carolina tonight.
Yeah, I didn't even realize we had 3 ranked games after this one. I don't know that they did either because nobody's talked about it. I don't even know if anybody realized that. I just know we got a bunch of ranked games the rest of the year with this SEC. So I feel like our guys have been pretty mature. I thought we had a great practice yesterday. We were off Sunday, so we got after it pretty good yesterday. Just got out of practice today. It was a lot shorter, but I thought it was pretty crisp. I thought they got after it pretty good today. We just didn't go that long. So I feel like they're locked in to what we need to do. I think we've got enough veteran guys to understand the meaning of these games, and I don't think we'll overlook South Carolina knowing how good they were last year. I mean, Clemson, we split with Clemson last year. We're 1-2 against Clemson since I've been here. So for them to beat Clemson's already beat Kentucky this year. That we know they're a good team. Our guys know they're a good team. Occasionally good teams have bad games. I think that's what happened Saturday.
So by using the transitive property, that means South Carolina's better than Kentucky, right? By using his logic.
I mean, I guess. I mean, hey, in most sports, yes. And in basketball, right now they are. And Kentucky just lost to Georgia, man.
They did, yeah. Again, look, going on the road in the SEC is not easy this year.
Maybe that's just what it's going to be this year. Maybe it's kind of going to be like football was this year, where nothing's a guarantee this year. We'll see what happens if that's even proven right. I just worry, though, that South Carolina, look, losing to Mississippi State, all right, it is what it is. The problem is these next 2 games could put you in a hole that's going to be way too deep to dig out of. Like if you're 0-3 to start out SEC play, with losses to Alabama and Auburn, potentially the 2 top teams in this conference, in my opinion, that's really tough to overcome. And this league is going to be really good this year. And South Carolina, they got to at least win one of these games.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because if you start off 0-3,
you're screwed basically.
You're going to have a tough time digging yourself out of that hole. And look, starting fast in any basketball game is important, but when you have a offense that runs as fast as Alabama's does, if you get off to a similar start to what you had against Mississippi State, you can find yourself down 40-5 in the blink of an eye. I don't know, I'm exaggerating a bit, but not by a whole lot, because this is an Alabama team that loves to run up and down the court, one of the fastest tempo teams in all of college basketball. They've scored over 100 points 4 times this year, including twice they've done it against teams like Illinois and Oklahoma. So quality opponents they've been able to put up a lot of points on. And again, Carolina's MO is slowing the game down, playing a grinded out, low scoring type of defensive game, and that's tough to do against Alabama.
No, and the slow starts are the big issue. Like, if you're already falling behind like you did against Mississippi State, like if, let's say, Mark Sears is hitting every shot he can and stuff in those first few minutes, I mean, you're going to be behind by double digits right out of the gate. And if your offense isn't able to keep up, you're not going to win this game. Like, you cannot be trailing by more than 10 points at halftime.
Well, one thing that's interesting about Alabama, and when you kind of look at what their team was made of last year en route to their Final Four, they were amazing at shooting from the outside. They could kill you from 3 all day long. That's not quite the case this year. When you look at the numbers on KenPom, when it comes to specifically shooting from outside the arc, they are 254th in the efficiency mark in that this season, compared to, I think they were 19th last year. However, inside the arc, when it comes to just shooting up straight up twos, second in the nation at 63%. So you're going to have to push them out and force them to just take a bunch of shots from the outside and hope they don't land.
That's the thing. And maybe you do hope that's the case. Maybe that's the strategy. But I don't know. I just feel like South Carolina, I haven't been very, overly confident about the way they played inside the paint, like closer to the basket. Like, Nick Pringle only grabbed 3 rebounds the other day against Mississippi State, and he's the guy that you brought in to kind of serve as that replacement for what you lacked in last year when you're facing SEC big men and you're getting outbeaten nearly every time. So hopefully tonight's the night where just things click for South Carolina. But it's like they have more than one issue right now. It's not even just that. It's the slow starts. It's the turnovers. It's what happens when Colin Murray-Boyles isn't in a rhythm? What does that mean for everyone else? So a lot of issues right now, but you hope maybe the stars will align and they'll all click tonight.
And you're going up against an Alabama team that has a lot of size. Going back to their SEC opener against Oklahoma over the weekend, they started 3 guys that are 6'10" and taller. You had Clifford Omiori, who is 6'11", Jaron Stevenson, who's also 6'11", and then Grant Nelson as well at 6'11". too. So you have a lot of size on this Alabama team, including some guys on the bench as well. So that is going to be tough, especially when it comes to grabbing those rebounds down low.
No, for sure. And this is going to have to, like I said before, this is going to have to be a really gutsy type of performance from CMB and Nick Pringle. And I think CMB can bounce back tonight. But again, you mentioned all that size Alabama has. That's going to make it tough, because I have a feeling, I mean, look, if Mississippi State did it, it'll continue to happen with guys pressuring CMB and trying to get him off his game, and that'll force South Carolina to have to rely on everyone else.
I mentioned Grant Nelson, who was already a really good rebounder a year ago. He's improved even more this year. He's grabbing 8.8 a game, which is 38th best in all of college basketball. Very effective shooting 2-pointers as well, 71% when inside the arc. And, of course, you also have to account for Mark Sears, who went for 31 against South Carolina last year and is tied for 4th in the SEC. Just over 18 points per game. Yeah,
Mark Sears cooked South Carolina last year. I think he had like 31 points. So, look, here's the thing: if you're letting the big names get hot tonight, like if you're letting Mark Sears do what he wants, especially from the outside, you're in trouble. But if you're not grabbing rebounds, that's kind of what gets swept under the rug a little bit against Mississippi State. Is that South Carolina gave up a lot of second chance looks, and you can't be having that against a team like this that will definitely cash in.
By the way, Alabama nearly had twice the amount of rebounds as Oklahoma did on Saturday, 51-26.
That's an Oklahoma team that's gonna.
It could be.
That's very overrated, Oklahoma, right there.
It could be a very long night at Colonial Life Arena if you don't show up and play your best basketball.
Thanks. I'm so looking forward. Thanks for reminding me.
I hope it's not, because I know you're going to be there tonight, and I hope you have a good, fun, compelling story to write after the game, and it's going to be a fun press conference. But again, if you don't get off to a good start, this Alabama team is going to make it miserable.
I'm just glad Saturday's game doesn't interfere with the Bills, because then I'd be very, very upset.
That's right. 1 o'clock tip on Saturday. You can get it out of the way before all the NFL games start. So I'm glad they scheduled it that way.
Yeah, well, let's hope for a good game tonight. Let's hope South Carolina shows a little bit of hope moving forward.
We'll dive into some college football coming up next. We are 230 some odd days from the 2025 season started. Never too early. Talk about who might be on the hot seat going into 2025 and who is on the hot seat this year as well. That's coming up next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Veltri along with you on your Wednesday on the game. Tyler Head once again reminding you, as always, about our friends over at Canty Foundation Specialist. I remind you all the time, but I'll remind you once again that if you start to notice some things around your home that are a little bit odd, then you could have some serious foundation problems. Things like cracks in your exterior brick, cracks in walls or above windows and door frames, doors, windows that might be sticking a little bit, uneven or bouncy floors, or cracks over your garage door. If you have any of these problems with your home, you need to get them checked out immediately. That's where our friends over at Canty Foundation Specialist come in. Go online to schedule an appointment today at cantycanfixit.com. They'll send a professional out to your home to evaluate what's going on with those weird things and get your foundation fixed right so you and your family can live comfortably going forward. Again, go online to schedule an appointment today at cantycanfixit.com for our friends at Canty Foundation Specialist. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. It's Ed and Jack Felch from Gamecock Central along with you on your Wednesday here on the game. Reminder, tomorrow morning, 7:30 on the early game, Bill and Preston are going to be drawing a winner to take home the $1,300 grand prize from the Lawyer Lisa Special Teams Touchdown Contest. Of course, Gamecocks did not get a special team score. Dang it, they came close in the Citrus Bowl last week.
They did.
But unfortunately, did not get a score this year. But we still have the money to give away. So again, if you've entered already, you're good. And I believe there's still time to enter if you go to 1075thegame.com for the Lawyer Lisa Special Teams Touchdown Contest for the winner being drawn tomorrow morning on the early game. We still got 3 more college football games left to go. You got the 2 semifinal games later on this week. And, of course, the national championship coming up on January 20th. But for most teams, their season is over, and they're already looking ahead to next year. And as they look ahead to next year, again, some 230 some odd days away from the 2025 season started, never too early to start thinking about who might be in a little bit of trouble going into 2025. Adam Rittenberg of ESPN put out his way too early top 25 coaching seat tiers yesterday, and we'll kind of focus specifically on coaches in the SEC here. And it's interesting the tiers that some of these coaches find themselves in. And we'll start on what he describes as the want this to work tier, where you have Brent Venables at Oklahoma, Hugh Freeze at Auburn, Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, and Mark Stoops at Kentucky. And for the first 3, Venables, Freeze, and DeBoer, still relatively early on in the process. Venables is now going into year number 4. Freeze will be going into year number 3. And, of course, Kalen DeBoer going into year number 2. But for each program, the expectations there very high. Again, Oklahoma is one of the most winning programs in all of college football. Auburn is one that routinely finds its way towards the top of the SEC every couple of years, but they haven't with Hugh Freeze. And, of course, Alabama, it speaks for itself. You should be competing for national championships if you're there, and having 4 losses in your first year is unacceptable to everybody in Tuscaloosa.
These are all programs that you just mentioned that should be better. Like, they are better programs than what the records are this year. And, again, like, with Alabama specifically, losing 4 games in a season is like going 0-12 out in Tuscaloosa. Like, that is uncharted territory and not in a good way. And it's something where they got to fix it real quick. They're obviously going to bring in the recruits, right? Like, that's something that Alabama will always be able to do just based on the name alone. But Kalen DeBoer they got to do a better job out there in Tuscaloosa. Like, they're going to have a new quarterback in there for next year with Jalen Milroe entering the NFL draft. We'll see maybe if they stay in-house. I think it's Ty Simpson, their backup quarterback there. But otherwise, we'll see what I haven't seen that they've gone after a portal quarterback or anything.
I think, is Keenan Reynolds the freshman that everybody's talking about, that he may make a push for the starting job? Regardless, they're going to have a new quarterback.
They're going to have a new quarterback, and that allows for a new, a fresh start, because Milroe was Saban's guy beforehand. So maybe it allows for, the new guy that maybe was in DeBoer's system this past season to learn and, be ready to go. So
when you look at, places like Oklahoma and Venables and then Auburn with Hugh Freeze, 2 programs that haven't had a ton of success. Now, of course, Venables got the 10-win season last year in his final year in the Big 12. And then Freeze, they completely missed a bowl game this year, which is unacceptable out there in Auburn. And those are 2 schools that have the resources, right? They have good NIL. They have talent-rich pipelines to pull talent from. You shouldn't be a 500 or below 500 at those kind of schools. And again, I'd say they're on a little more of a hot seat than DeBoer is, because DeBoer is only going to year number 2, where if those schools are 6-6 or somewhere around that again, they're both looking for new head coaches.
I think Auburn is going to be fine moving forward. I think I don't know how they do it, especially in a state like Alabama where they are not the big team in there. But for whatever reason, and I've seen it out there since National Signing Day last month, all these recruits, the top ones in the state of Alabama, are just going to Auburn. I don't know what it is about Auburn that just sells them on it. Maybe it's Hugh Freeze. Maybe it's something going on there. The culture, which we've heard before, the culture at Auburn hasn't been always the best. But I think Auburn's in a better position than Oklahoma would be. Oklahoma, I feel like at this point is just, I think Brett Venables is a dead man walking right now just because you look, I mean, the schedule's the same next year. It's just flipped. I mean, by the time Oklahoma gets to Columbia, heck, that could be the game where if Oklahoma loses that one, then I think Oklahoma might look at just firing Brett Venables. I think he's very much, compared to these other coaches, I think he's very much on the hottest of hot seats.
And the fourth coach in this category, if we want this to work, is Mark Stoops at Kentucky. He's the longest tenured coach in the SEC now that Nick Saban is retired, having been there since 2013. And, you know, this year was so interesting for them because, remember, before they played South Carolina, they, dominated Southern Miss in 2.5 quarters. Carolina comes in there, beats them by 25. They pull the upset against Kentucky a few weeks later. They played Georgia to a 1-point game. And after all that, they end up 4-8. And the thing about Mark Stoops at Kentucky, which he had done consistently since 2016, was at least make a bowl game every single year. They'd occasionally pop up there, have a 10-win season, have an 8-win season, but mostly, somewhere hovering around 500, and then you dip below that this year. And then again, this is a guy that people thought was going to go to Texas A&M before Elko got the job, but he stays at Kentucky and has one of the most disappointing seasons he's had in his entire tenure there. And honestly, I would not have been surprised if they decided to move on from him after this past season. He's getting at least another year, but you go 4-8 or 5-7 again, you're done.
I'm just surprised that he hasn't been let go. But you know what? I'll give Kentucky this. They're probably giving him the benefit of the doubt. Number one, because he's been there for so long now. Like, he's been there since 2013, and I didn't even realize this because I remember when Kentucky had that 10-win season not too long ago, winning the Citrus Bowl back in 18, and they've had some good years, but honestly, like since then, it's been 2 straight years of 7-6, and then 4-8 this year. So. Look, Kentucky is in a weird spot right now where I don't think they're going to be good again next year. I could be proven wrong, and we'll see. But, I mean, Kentucky's got a lot of work to do, and I just feel like I don't know if 6-6 or getting back to a bowl game barely is going to be enough for Stoops to keep his job.
His next tier is it's going to cost us, which means if we get rid of this head coach, it's going to burn a pretty big hole in our pocket, and that's where we find Brian Kelly. And Brian Kelly, I think, is somebody that's going to be guilty of having too much success too early. Comes into LSU a couple seasons ago, immediately takes them to the SEC championship game. They beat Alabama, the whole 9 yards, and in the 2 seasons since then, they've taken steps back. And this was a team that halfway through the year we thought was a playoff caliber team, and they end up, I know they won their bowl game against Baylor or whatever, but they end up, severely disappointing, unranked compared to what the expectations going into the season were.
You want to know what the buyout was for Brian Kelly if he were fired after this past season?
Is it 52?
I think it's 61.
60. Okay, I think it goes down to 52 in 2025.
Yeah, but that's just insane. It puts into perspective that, look, even honestly, look, LSU wasn't horrible this year. They had a 9-win season, right? Because they won the Texas Bowl.
They got to 9 wins with the Texas Bowl.
And you're right. I think he achieved so much early, and we say achieved. I mean, he got to the SEC championship game, and that's really been it. But LSU is a better program than that, and it is surprising that LSU hasn't made it back to Atlanta since then, especially with considering Saban's gone to Alabama. Like, if I would have guessed a team that would have taken the next step forward, I'd probably say it's LSU. And
when you look at LSU, the last 3 head coaches that they've had have all won national championships. Yes, I know one of those was Nick Saban. Obviously speaks for itself. Yeah. But Les Miles and Ed Orgeron, I'd say Brian Kelly is a better head coach than those 2 guys. And as of right now, I know it's only year number 3, but he hadn't even come close to that yet.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, it's just, I don't know what it is. Like, he's getting some talent there, but it's just, is it not being an SEC guy before coming here that is, I don't know. It's just, it's a little surprising that LSU hasn't really had that much success under Brian Kelly, and I don't think they're gonna fire him anytime soon. Not until things get drastically bad. Like if they lose to South Carolina, lose to some other teams next year, maybe you start having that conversation, but we'll see what happens. I mean, they put so much stock into BK that it would be crazy to fire him.
There's a couple more names on this list and a couple of other tiers, which we'll get to wrap up our number one of the Extra Point. Along with you on your Wednesday, Tyler and Jack here on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyrod and Jack Feltree along with you here on your Wednesday on the Game. Just reminiscing about the old days of the BCS and how far we've come since then during that commercial break. It used to be so simple, right? You had one versus two. They played each other. They had a month to prepare, and that was it. Now we're into quarters, first rounds, quarters, semis, and then the national championship. I'm not complaining. I love more football, and I love the fact that we have games that mean something going on into mid to late January. It's just it's different. We've come a long way.
Yeah, and it's just a crazy time right now in college football, but I'm enjoying it. I'm liking how long the season goes, and I will never say no to more football.
Last couple of things in reference to our list from Adam Rittenberg of ESPN yesterday on way too early hot seats for 2025, focusing specifically on the SEC. The third category he's got here is progress needed, and he puts Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State in that category. Of course, he came in year number one, first time ever as a head coach, took over after the disaster of a year that Zach Arnett had after taking over for Mike Leach after his untimely passing. I actually thought at the end of the year, Lebby's team showed a little bit of potential, a little bit of fight in them, and a little bit of optimism that they could start to turn the corner a little bit in 2025. But nobody is saying, well, you got to get up to 7 and 8 wins by 25 or 26. Like, this is going to be a process for Lebby out there at Mississippi State.
It is going to take time. If anyone's, I wouldn't even put him on the hot seat until, like, if by year 3, the progress just isn't there. Like, if Mississippi State wins 3 games in 2025 and then they win 4 games in 2026, hypothetically, there's progress, but not substantial progress, right? You're winning another game per year, and that's all hypothetical. Mississippi State is a program that they just also happen to be in the same state as an Ole Miss team that is going to bring in loads of recruits, and you're right down the road from Alabama where people will, players will flock to. So I think you got to give this at least a few more years. Like, I know that's probably not what Mississippi State fans want to hear if they're ever listening, but it's like.
But at the same time, outside of, the Dan Mullen years and being ranked number 1 for a couple weeks, Mississippi State doesn't have a history of being this elite program in the SEC. So I feel like their fan base can be patient.
But what do we consider the expectation for Mississippi State? Is it making a bowl game?
Based on their history, yeah.
Yeah.
Could you get yourself in a position to be a playoff caliber team? Sure, anybody in the SEC is certainly capable of that. But if they're not there by year number 4, I don't think anybody's saying, "Well, get this guy out of here." Like, again, I think they understand where they fall in the SEC.
No, most definitely. Like, again, it's going to take time, and if they somehow get to, if they're within striking distance of a bowl game in 2025, I consider that a success.
That's big progress.
Yeah, that's substantial progress. But I mean, again, you got to get there first.
Last category here is the can't backslide category, which finds Sam Pittman from Arkansas and Billy Napier from Florida. 2 guys that going into the year, especially with Napier, I don't think either one of us saw them lasting the entire year. Sam Pittman's crew goes 7-6. They win their bowl game in Liberty Bowl a couple weeks ago. Napier's crew finished the end of the year with that tough gauntlet of a schedule. Obviously, beating LSU. Obviously, played Georgia pretty close. That they exceeded a lot of people's, beat Ole Miss as well, exceeded a lot of people's expectations this year. And Billy Napier rightfully earned himself an extra year.
Got to give Billy a lot of credit, man. Like, we both thought Florida was going to fire him early on in the season, and it would have made sense.
And it started off ugly.
Yeah, like, you lost to Miami to open the year. If you had lost, I'm still convinced if you had lost that game to Mississippi State, we're talking about a new coach at Florida by now. But they won that game, and look, the schedule, like you said, was very tough down the stretch, but they did manage to pull off some nice wins, and that really did save the job. Like, winning your final 4 games of the year, that's a huge momentum boost. That said, you have to be able to continue that. Just because you're saved right now doesn't mean you won't get fired midseason next year. So you really got to start out well next year. And you go to Coral Gables to start the season around that time. So it's going to be tough.
Billy did enough to cool the flames around his seat, but they are not out.
No.
They are ready to reignite at the drop of a hat if things start to go sideways in 2025. And again, Sam Pittman, I thought he was going to get fired 2 seasons ago at the end of 2023. They gave him another year. Again, went 7-6. Really, in retrospect, should not have lost that game to Oklahoma State. Could have had an 8-win season, but showed you some promise and showed you when you had a guy like Taylon Green at quarterback, you can be dangerous. They beat Tennessee, played a close game against Texas, so they're going to need to take a little bit of a step forward in 2025 to keep him going out there. But I just love Sam Pittman, and I hope he sticks around the SEC.
Me too. I really wish him the best. And look, it was just a lot of inconsistencies last season. It was win a few games, lose a game, lose another game, then win a game. Like, it's this seesaw effect. So Arkansas's kind of got to figure out how to win these games that, like you said, the Oklahoma game, the A&M game. You win those games, we're talking about a much better season for Arkansas.
We'll see how all these coaches fare when the 2025 season does end up rolling around. That'll do it for hour number 1 of the Extra Point. Coming up in hour number 2, we'll check with our guy, Dimitri Ravanos, get the latest on the Panthers as they closed out their season on Sunday as well. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. 10 o'clock, welcome back in hour number 2. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. And for the first time in like a month, Dimitri, we were doing the math in the break there. We are actually talking once again. I was off for a couple days in December. We had the holidays, of course, the bowl game last week, and then January the 1st. So we have not reconvened in a while. I'm assuming you did not make the trek down to Tampa to watch your team play in the ReliaQuest Bowl, which, by the way, I still don't know what ReliaQuest does. Do you have any insight on that?
In our hearts, it will always be the Outback Bowl. I assume that ReliaQuest just owns a variety of Outback franchises across the country. No, in fact, not only did I not go to Tampa for the ReliaQuest Bowl, I was on the other side of the country in Arizona during the game.
Yes, you said you're not a fan of the Eagles, and you were not standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona.
No. I was standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona.
But you were not doing it for the purposes of being cute for the song, right?
That's right. I walked up to the Don Henley statue and gave it the finger because that is just the worst band I've ever heard in my life.
I would, okay, so apparently, appreciate our guy Jalen giving the inside here. ReliaQuest is a cybersecurity company, so now we know.
Dude, War is now sponsoring every college football bowl game, right? Like ReliaQuest is a little bit more covert. Like it's not when we had the Bell Helicopter Bowl or
is Northrop Grumman still the Armed Forces Bowl?
Oh yeah. You got to defend Fort Worth, baby.
I guess so. Yeah, I did find that one interesting. But, college football obviously coming to a close. But you do your podcast with Lauren on all things Carolina Panthers. They closed out their season this past Sunday, beating my Falcons no less in overtime to in the year 5-12. Not a great season, but considering what the expectations for the Panthers were going into this year, finishing 5-12 and technically not finishing last in the NFC South, it's actually kind of an accomplishment.
I had to go back and listen to our first episode of the season to remember, and I picked 6-11 this year, so I'm not too far off of what my expectations were. I think the headline, though, Tyler, is less about the overall season more about, like, in that game, you saw the Bryce we've been waiting 2 years on. I mean, like, not only making the throws, but confident and dare I say cocky in the way he was making those throws with just pure belief that his guys were going to be there.
For the last handful of games this year, and we'll get a quote from Bryce Young here in a second, he looked like he was finally enjoying playing football, which is something that we haven't seen out of him since he was at Alabama. He looked like he was deer in the headlights and drinking from a fire hose for the first, year and a half of his career. Finally seems to be settling in. The results kind of speak for themselves. And again, a lot of optimism on what he's going to be going into 2026 now.
It's a testament to the fact that some of these guys really do need to sit to achieve what it is you think they can. I think you look at the top of the draft this year, and look, obviously the Panthers aren't going to be in the market for a quarterback, but I see 3 guys at the top of this draft. One of them is NFL ready in Shadur Sanders, but I think the ceiling is higher on both Cam Ward and Jalen Milroe of what they can be in the NFL. But that ceiling for both of them is unachievable if they have to start day one, and in Milroe's case, maybe even year one.
Let's hear a little bit from Bryce Young. Cut number 21 here, Dave. This is Bryce Young talking the other day about his improvement after returning from being benched earlier on in the season.
I don't know if vindication is a word. I always try to control what I control and just try to be the best version of myself every single day. And I'm going to continue to chase that. Again, this is, yesterday I think just as a team was a good day for sure. But, there's a lot of stuff we want to get better at. We want to improve at, that we want to work at, that I want to work at. And every day I'm just going to be just having the approach of being grateful for the opportunity, grateful for God just giving us that chance. And then just having the attitude to want to improve, wanting to get better, wanting to embrace the good and the bad and grow from it. And that was something that was a big theme for this entire year and is definitely going to be a theme moving forward.
And let's go back in time to the beginning of the season when they did decide to bench him in favor of Andy Dalton. And then he was thrust back into the starting role before they really were planning to because of Andy Dalton having the injury. And even when he came back, it was still a little bit shaky, but didn't kind of hit his stride as the season came to a close. What do you kind of contribute as the biggest reason why things finally started to click for Bryce Young?
I think the fact that it did not take too long for the team to win with him in there. I think it was their second game with him back as the starter was the game where they won and beat New Orleans. And for the first time in his NFL career, he got to kneel out the clock. I think at this point, it's still his only time in his NFL career that he got to kneel out the clock. Look, as a Bama guy, what I've been telling fellow Panthers fans is you will see the worker. You will see the guy that is kind of a perfectionist in this. What I had discounted is, remember, he got to Tuscaloosa for the 2020 season, and they didn't start him. And I would bet that in college, I would bet that freshman Bryce Young was as good as, if not better, than Mac Jones. But you had a skilled, seasoned coaching staff that understands that it is a big adjustment, not just in terms of level of football, but in terms of life, going from high school to college. Going from college to the real world is an even bigger adjustment, right? And so that time to sit and watch and let things slow down is pretty important for anybody, but especially a guy like Bryce that literally had never been on the worst team in whatever league it is he is playing in before.
Well, and I think continuity also benefits Bryce Young. You know, when you go back to being at Alabama, being there for a couple of years, being able to sit behind Mac Jones, develop and learn, and eventually, you know, earn the starting role and en route to the Heisman Trophy win and all that kind of stuff. And then he comes to the Panthers, which, again, were a bad organization when they drafted him. And, you know, you fire your head coach and Frank Wright before the first season's over with. And then going to year number 2, I'm kind of worried about this with Caleb Williams. And in Chicago specifically, you're resetting everything. You're bringing in a new coach. You're bringing in new offense coordinator, new quarterbacks coach, the whole 9 yards. And it's kind of like starting over from zero for a guy that was already struggling, now saying, okay, let's reset and do this all over again. And again, finally, he was able to kind of hit his stride towards the end of the year, but that was not a guarantee. And credit to Dave Canales for working his magic seemingly once again on another young quarterback.
Yeah, I think you also have to sort of look at the reality of what was around Bryce when he first came in, and maybe Caleb Williams will experience this a little bit too. The best player on that offense was playing out of position in year 1. You were not playing Adam Thielen as a slot where he has thrived his whole career. The running game, you had one running back in Miles Sanders that was more hurt than he had let on, and Chuba Hubbard was not last season what he was this past season. So some of the improvement is stuff that is beyond Bryce's control. And I would caution the Bears to make sure they really take this into account. And maybe Pete Carroll is that guy. I know they also wanted to talk to Mike McCarthy. Like, don't look for the dude with the pelts on the wall. Look for the dude that is the best fit for the talent you have. And I think that's what Dave Canales was. I still think Dave Canales has a lot of work to do to be a good NFL head coach, but he grew just like the team did during the season. And that's really important. Lauren and I were talking about this. Some of our listeners think I wanted Canales fired during the season. And I never said I wanted him fired. I just acknowledged the reality that he became a head coach before he even learned how to be a coordinator. So asking him to do both of these things at the same time in year 1 of leading a franchise seems like, what did you expect the outcome to be? Like, it was going to be rough this year.
Sure. As we transition into the offseason, Panthers are going to have the number 8 overall pick. I imagine they're going to probably go defensively heavy early in the draft. What are the specific areas they're going to need?
I mean, obviously the pass rush needs a lot of help. I think the run defense will be aided by the return of Derek Brown. It doesn't mean you don't try and add another tackle as well. But, Tyler, this was the worst scoring defense in NFL history. And given what NFL offenses are doing right now with the number 8 pick, I mean, maybe you cross your fingers and Travis Hunter's sort of ability to do everything means some NFL teams at the top see him as a specialist in nothing, and the best cornerback in the draft falls to you. If not, I'd be very happy with Will Johnson out of Michigan, or trade back and get Ben Morrison out of Notre Dame. I think corner should be the top priority, not because it is the biggest area of need, but because after the first round, there is a much bigger fall off to that next group of corners than there is from that top group of 4 pass rushers to the second round guys. I mean, in the second round, you could probably get Kyle Kennard. In the third round, you could probably get Donovan Ezeraku out of Boston College. And if, listeners here in SEC country, if you don't know Ezeraku's game, go look at the stats, man. 17 sacks this year, 3 forced fumbles. He is a monster. And you can find pass rushers like that later. You cannot find secondary like that later in this draft.
Of course, last year in the first round of the draft, they obviously picked up Xavier Legette out of South Carolina. He's somebody
Talk about someone that has work to do in the offseason.
I was going to ask what your assessment of year number one for him in the NFL was.
Social media A+, in terms of gameplay, C, B-. I mean, I think that the potential is there, and I'm willing to be patient with him, just like I asked people to be patient with Bryce Young. Young dude, spotlight, like you got to get rid of the dropsies, man. You're not going to last in this league if you keep dropping some of those passes. XL dropped this season.
Yeah, and again, obviously, very beloved guy here, and I think
I would tell you, Tyler,
sure.
Already a beloved guy with Panthers fans. I took
absolutely.
I took my kid to the Mayo Bowl, and we walked through the Panthers store, and XL's jersey is the one that's the most picked over. That just from naked eye looking.
I feel like the NFL as a whole is slowly starting to finally understand what he's saying compared to most of us here that get it. But like anytime he pops up on a podcast or somebody's interviewing him, it's always goes a long way. But yes, some of the more specific things on the field do need an area of improvement. We'll check in with you as the weeks go by, as the NFL playoffs get rolling coming up this weekend. But last question for you here. As we get started this weekend, if I gave you the choice between the teams with byes in Kansas City and Detroit or the field, who are you taking to win the Super Bowl?
Man, I guess I'm taking the field. Like, I think Detroit is going to get there. I think this is the year that all of the demons of the early 90s are excised in Buffalo, though. Like, so if they're in the field, I got to take the field.
Ooh, a Buffalo-Detroit Super Bowl is what you're telling me?
In New Orleans?
In New Orleans?
Those people are going to be out of control.
Man, there's not going to be a table safe in the state of Louisiana.
Yeah, not a table safe, not a tap that's working after Sunday.
So our guy Jack Feltree that does the 9 to 10 hour with me, huge Bills fan, and I told him, I said, if they win the Super Bowl, we're putting you through a table in the studio on our live stream. Like, that is going to happen, and I really hope it does now.
Look, put them through the console. You could use a new console in that studio you're in.
Man, that would be that'd be a tough fall. This thing's pretty thick. I wouldn't do that.
That's what I'm saying. Like, we'll have to do like Hell in a Cell, throw off the top of the cake.
I will go find a WWE particle board table that breaks when you look at it and make it easy for them.
Well, you probably should do it now. Netflix is driving the price of those particle board tables up by the day.
They absolutely are. We'll dive into that a little bit later on the hour with that guy Jalen Tart coming up in a few minutes. Appreciate it as always, Dimitri. We'll check in with you next week.
All right, buddy. Good talking to you.
It is the Extra Points Hour head along with you. Jalen Tart from WIS hopping in the next segment coming up here on your Wednesday on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday. Welcoming back in from WIS, our guy, Jalen Tart. It's been a few weeks since we've seen each other because of the holidays. Hopefully, Merry Christmas and all that was great. I'm not going to tell you Happy New Year because it is January the 8th.
I feel you.
And we've passed the time frame. We've talked about this last couple of days.
Yeah.
When you get past a week, I feel like that's too long.
I think it is too long to say Happy New Year because the year is already here. It's taken me a while to not say that to everyone, but since I haven't seen you in a few weeks, Happy New Year.
I will accept that from you because it has been a couple weeks. Yeah. And, man, once you turn the calendar over, especially from a basketball standpoint, things take off running because we're in conference play. Obviously, the men's team, big game tonight against Alabama. We'll get to that in a moment. Yep. Women's team has already got a couple SEC games under their belt so far, but huge news coming down yesterday as they get set to take on Texas A&M coming up tomorrow afternoon. Ashton Watkins going to be lost for the season with a torn ACL that she suffered over the weekend.
Huge loss. One of their top defensive players on the team, especially in the SEC, averaging fourth. She's fourth in the SEC in blocks. Very, very big loss. So with this game coming up against Texas A&M, the low now is going to be on Chloe Kitts, but I would not be surprised if more of the minutes would go to Joyce Edwards. Joyce Edwards has been playing phenomenally well within the last month. You know, she had a slow start to the season, but she's playing very, very, very well. But the thing with Texas A&M, they did recently beat 25th ranked, Ole Miss.
Yep.
And their starters were phenomenal down the stretch. Being down 10 points to start the fourth quarter and come all the way back, I think the quick keys for Carolina to win the game is you got to rebound the basketball. With A&M, their total rebounds is 39.2 averaging per game, with Carolina's 43.4. And then you got to limit the production of their three starting players of Aisha Coulibaly, Sahara Jones, and Soleil Williams, where Soleil Williams was the unsung hero against Ole Miss, leading the team in scoring with 18 points on 5 of 11 shooting from the field, where on average he's averaging 6.4 points per game. But the rebounding is going to come from Sahara Jones and from Wally down low, where Sahara Jones is averaging 7 rebounds a game. But the big factor, the final factor, is you got to start the game off really well. You can't start off the game slow. Carolina's still consistently trying to find their offense and getting a rhythm offensively. I think that we'll have a more complete offensive game, better than what we saw in the Mississippi State game, where they had a big lapse in the first quarter.
And that's something that's been a problem throughout the entire year. And we've talked about it ad nauseum. And look, when you have the talent and depth that Carolina has, you can play okay in the first two quarters and then dominate third and fourth quarter and walk away with huge victories like you had against Missouri, Mississippi State to start off conference play. But as you get into this stretch where you've got a lot of tough games coming up, after you play A&M, which again you mentioned they beat a top 25 Tennessee team the other day, you're playing 5 of the 6 scoring offenses in the SEC. All those teams ranked with Texas and Alabama and LSU and Tennessee and the whole 9 yards there. So it's not going to get any easier. And I feel like if there's another loss coming for South Carolina, which none of us want to happen, obviously, it would come in that time frame because it's tough game after tough game. And if you can't figure out those bad starts, those slow starts, it's probably going to bite you in one of those games.
I think if Carolina were to lose, they probably were to lose in 2 of the 5 games. Either me personally, Texas, because Texas is 3rd in total points per game, and Tennessee, they're number 1 in total points per game. But with these stretch of games, you're playing Texas at home, at 18th Alabama, which Alabama is really, really good. Coming back at home against Oklahoma, where you've seen a familiar foe in Reagan Beers from Oregon State, now coming over to the SEC, playing with them. Well, she is leading. Well, she's top 10 in rebounds in the conference with 9.3, and then LSU is a critical game. LSU is always going to be a critical game, no matter where it is on the schedule. But this time, you have Anissa Morrow and Flau'jae Johnson coming to the CLA, where both of the players are top 10 in SEC in scoring, where Morrow is the top rebounder in the country, averaging 14 rebounds a game. And Tennessee, they're the number 1 scoring team in the country, putting up 97.3 points per game, even though they did lose to Oklahoma by 1 point.
Yeah.
But Talasia Cooper, the South Carolina native, she is the team's leading scorer with 17.8, with Jewel Spear, who's a more experienced player on Kim Caldwell's staff, being second in scoring in 13.1. So a lot of scoring, but it all comes with Carolina having a consistent offense and starting the game off on a fast-paced start.
Quickly, you mentioned LSU. Did you see what Kim Mulkey wore the other day?
I was not a fan of it.
She was inside a basketball hoop.
I didn't know what was going on. It was just a whole lot of commotion going on. It was a dress like Kim Mulkey day for the fans at LSU, but
I'm not surprised because I mean she's always, especially in a big game, she's always going to come with something big,
flashy.
Was it the Carolina game last year where she had the Coca-Cola branding on the pantsuit that was like glittery or whatever?
I don't think.
No, I think the Carolina game, she had the tiger on her back.
Yes.
Yeah. It was one of the other games she had the Coca-Cola branding.
I wonder who does her outfits.
I'm sure there's some seamstress down there in Baton Rouge that gets paid a lot of money to do that.
How much is she paying for her to get these outfits custom made to where you would want to wear something? I would never wear anything like that. No disrespect to Kim Mulkey. She's a great person that dresses up in her own fashion. But for me personally, I'm not wearing anything like that.
But you know what? And we'll dive into this more as that game approaches. I love having somebody that is so out there and in your face as like the heel of women's college basketball, because she's very easy to hate, especially from our standpoint because of the rivalry with South Carolina. Though rivalries you got to win, and LSU's not been winning against South Carolina.
But I did mention Texas earlier. Vic Schaefer is coming back into Colonial Life Arena, his first time being back in CLA since the COVID year.
Yep.
So to see that rivalry renewed between Dawn Staley and Vic Schaefer, it will be a sight to see come Sunday.
Listen, all these games are huge, and you're going to be on national television for a lot of these games. A lot of eyes on Carolina, who, again, showed you some flaws earlier on in the year with that loss to UCLA, and people are saying, is this the same caliber of team that it was a year ago, or they're going to fall short once again? And again, a tough stretch of games coming up, and not having Ashlyn Watkins, who, again, second on the teams in rebounds, but so aggressive on defense. And there's a reason they call her Ashlyn Swatkins, because she will knock shots out of the way constantly. We've seen her do that game in and game out, and that's certainly going to be a presence you're going to miss on the defensive side of the ball for Carolina.
I agree. I think, again, Chloe Kitts now has to step into that role of being the dominant power forward player without Ashlyn Watkins. We've seen it at the beginning of the season where she's dominated and had a huge impact on games, but now that your most experienced defensive player is gone, now you have to step up. And again, Joyce Edwards is going to be a key piece to this down the stretch as the season goes on.
And that game coming up tomorrow afternoon. It's a little bit of an earlier game. 5 o'clock tip, 4:30 pregame between South Carolina and Texas A&M. That's going to be on our sister station, 98.5 WOMG. Carolina calls tomorrow night with Coach Paris here at 6 o'clock on the game in Columbia, and 100.3 the game out in Myrtle Beach. Then again, that big game with Texas for the women coming up on Sunday as well. We'll come back. We'll dive into some college football. 4 teams left standing with semifinals coming up later on this week. What would a national championship mean to each program? That's coming up next. It is the Extra Point Tyler Head and Jalen Tart from WIS with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jalen Tart from WIS hanging out with you on your Wednesday here on the game. It is neat as we are venturing into mid-January. Still got a lot of college football left with the semifinal games coming up tomorrow, starting with Notre Dame and Penn State. Capital One Orange Bowl down there in Miami. Then Friday night, Ohio State and Texas in the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic out there in Dallas. Yesterday, Kirk Herbstreit was on the Andy and Ari podcast on On3, and cut number 20 here, Dave. He talked about the ratings bonanza that these Final Four teams give.
Let me straighten the record on one last thing. The ESPN loves the SEC so much that we could not have paid for a better Final Four with Notre Dame and Ohio State and Penn State and Texas. The only one missing is Michigan. If you could somehow wedge Michigan in. So like this idea that we want Alabama and Texas A&M and Auburn, and are you kidding me? Like if you're asking us who we would want, we'll take Ohio State every year, Notre Dame. Like this is a ratings bonanza. So if you're going to accuse us of anything, you should accuse us of wanting Ohio State, wanting Notre Dame, and these big brands. If you knew anything about ratings, that's who you want.
And he's not wrong. I mean, when I think of brand names in college football that are going to attract the interest of the casual viewer, and look, that's what, when we talk about these championship games, when we talk about semifinals, quarterfinals, and all that kind of stuff, they know diehards are going to watch anyway. People that love college football are going to watch regardless of who the teams are. They want to get that person that's on the fringe. They want to get that casual observer, the person that pays attention when things are really big or really important, say, oh, Notre Dame's playing in the national championship game. Ohio State is playing in the semifinal. Texas is playing in the semifinal. Penn State. Like, those are four names that do grab casual's attention.
I agree. And granted, this is the first year of the 12-year playoff. And the thing about college football is whoever wins, we expect them to get back. And the key question is, will that team get back? And what new teams will come up? We didn't expect Indiana to get in. No one expected Indiana to get in. But the games, for the first round games, were really not that good. But last week, those games were really, really, really good. But I didn't expect these four teams to even get in, honestly.
Given the talent level of Ohio State and Texas, getting to this point is not surprising. I thought Georgia was going to beat Notre Dame because I thought Georgia on paper was the bigger team. Notre Dame out-physicaled them, which surprised a lot of people, including myself, and credit to Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman for doing that. Penn State has had the easiest path up to this point. I mean, again,
Boise State having a bye.
SMU and Boise State. And look, God love Boise State. Ashton Genties was a cool story. Penn State's a lot more talented of a team, and they showed that last week in the Fiesta Bowl. Now they finally get tested against Notre Dame.
I picked Notre Dame to beat Georgia because I knew from what I saw that Notre Dame was going to be physical. I just didn't know. I didn't think that their offense was going to capitalize off of what their defense was doing. And it turned out to be true. And now you're looking at Notre Dame as if they could beat Penn State, can they match the overall elite caliber of Ohio State? We all were on pins and needles 2 weeks ago thinking if Ohio State lost to Tennessee, that Ryan Day was going to be out of a job. Well, now that they beat Tennessee, you beat the number one team in the country in Oregon, who didn't realize that they were playing in a football game until the third quarter. They romped them.
They realized it. They just weren't good enough to do anything about it.
And honestly, the first four teams that had a bye, all four of those teams lost. So that tells you the question now becomes, do you give those four teams that win the conference championship bye weeks? Because now that's giving those teams that are playing in the first four in the first weekend the advantage of, one, keeping the momentum going and giving a better performance in those type of games. But I don't disagree with Herbstreit at all.
There's going to be a lot of conversation this offseason about changes that are going to be made, and things are going to change. And we're only in the structure of the 12-team playoff guaranteed for one more year, and then it could go to 14 or 16 or whatever after that. And again, plenty of time to dive into those things. But kind of narrowing back in on what we do have left, we're guaranteed to have another first-time national championship winning head coach on January the 20th, whether it be Ryan Day, whether it be Steve Sarkisian, whether it be Marcus Freeman, or whether it be James Franklin. And I don't know if we thought that's what our semifinal was going to end up being, but it's an interesting story nonetheless. And I kind of thought about this yesterday. What is the value, not just to the head coach themselves, but what is the value to the program themselves for each one of these four teams of winning a national championship? I feel like, starting with Ohio State, because I think they got the best chance out of anybody to win this thing, given how they played in the first two rounds. It's obviously a big deal because winning a national championship is a huge deal, but they're a program that has very much been there and done that before. The last national championship was only 10 years ago. They've had the talent level that's been on the cusp of getting back to this game and winning it. So to them, not that it's not a big deal, it would be the least big deal of all four of these teams left standing, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. I was going to literally say that, too. They haven't won since 2014 when they beat Oregon in the national championship. Notre Dame has not won the national championship since 1988. I was not born. I was not a thought in 1988. But Texas, the last time I've seen Texas on this stage like this was Vince Young.
Well, they played for another one against Alabama back in 2009.
Okay.
But the last time they won was that great Rose Bowl in 2005.
For Texas, it's been a while. They got a coach in Sarkisian, who I personally think is really, really good. The offense with Ewers, I've been skeptical with Ewers, but I think the talent surrounding him is really good. The defense is really good. Penn State, I don't know. Penn State, with the value, I think their value is really low. I've never really seen Penn State get to this point, but they have been really good. But can you get over the hump? They're answering the call that they're getting over the hump. I think the value is equal, but if I had to pick highest or lowest, Ohio State would be the highest and Penn State would be the lowest.
I think when you look at like a Texas, right, who, again, it wasn't all that long ago that they won the last national championship. It's been 20 years, but recently relevant enough compared to Penn State and Notre Dame. I think for them, winning the national championship is a validation in a lot of people's eyes, because for how long have we joked about, ooh, Texas is back, Texas is not back, Texas is back, Texas is not back. It was a meme for a while. Now they are legitimately one of the better programs in college football, and in the first year in the SEC, no less. Yeah, they didn't beat Georgia, they didn't win the SEC championship game, but if they came in and won a national championship in year number one, and yes, their schedule wasn't all that hard, but still getting to this point, oh, you'd never hear the end of it from Texas fans.
I think Texas, from what I heard from a close friend, someone said that Texas is a team of destiny against Ohio State. I wouldn't be shocked that they would beat them, but with Notre Dame, they're not in a conference. They're independent. And then no one expected them to be there after they won 11 straight after losing to Northern Illinois. I think this would be a culmination for Notre Dame fans because they've had interesting teams, but when you match them up against Power 4 schools, they will always get stomped. And for them to out-bully a Georgia team that won the SEC, that speaks a lot of volumes going into this weekend.
And I think similarly for Notre Dame compared to Texas, look, Notre Dame is, again, one of the biggest names in all of sports, period, not just college football. Notre Dame is a brand recognized worldwide. And for the first 100 years of college football, they were a team that was routinely winning national championships and always at the top of the sport. Like you said, 1988 was the last time they won a national championship. Neither one of us were born then. And since then, they've always been in conversations and always been talked about to this higher degree. But until Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame beat Georgia last week, they had not won a major bowl game since the mid-90s when Lou Holtz was there. It had been a long time since they had actually accomplished anything that great. Yeah, I know they made the national championship a couple years ago and got waxed by Alabama, made a couple of, made the playoff and got beat pretty soundly there too. They were a team when they got to these big stages, could not compete and could not perform. And if they won 2 more games and won the national championship, it would kind of very much be, hey, we're truly back again. Watch out, Notre Dame is the Notre Dame of old, finally, after all these years.
And we could say the same with Penn State as well. I think all 4 of these teams are equally talented. Penn State, too. Like, we have not seen Penn State in a national title game or in a big game like this in so many years. I mean, from what I've known growing up, all I heard was Joe Paterno. That was all I knew about Penn State. But to see them on this level, it's really cool to see what James Franklin has done with the program since that era has passed.
And the biggest knock on James Franklin is, well, he can't win big games. He's famously 1-18 versus top 5 opponents. And again, they've had the easiest path so far. Beating SMU and Boise State is not on par with beating Oregon or beating Georgia or something like that. So really, even up to this point in the playoff, they still have not proven a whole lot.
Yeah.
But if you beat Notre Dame, that's, undeniable. And of course, if you beat Ohio State or Texas in the national championship, that's undeniable as well. And I think for a lot of people, that will, within the Penn State realm of fan base, that will validate them to the rest of college football. Like, hey, we're not the team that just crumbles when you play the best opponents. I don't think they're going to get there, but if they did, that's what they would be saying.
Quick
about
stat
them.
here: their last championships was 1986.
Yeah, and
so
again,
that was
like the Paterno era back in the 80s. Playing for and winning national championships was the norm for them.
Yes.
Since then, it's not been.
Yes.
And this is their chance to reaffirm themselves in that way. I don't think they're going to get there.
I don't think so either.
I think they are the worst of the Final Four is not their best way to put it.
Offensively, they're good. They can run the ball, and they have a good receivers. But against Notre Dame's defense, I don't know. Because Notre Dame is really good against the run defense from what we saw against last week against Georgia.
Yeah, well, we'll see. And again, that game coming up tomorrow night between Penn State and Notre Dame, which, by the way, both teams run the ball really well. That's the MO of Notre Dame's offense. So if you like old school running the football, tomorrow night's definitely going to be your game compared to the more high-flying acrobatics that I think we're going to see on Friday night in the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic.
I agree. Get your popcorn ready. We got some great football this weekend.
Yeah, and then two teams playing for the national championship coming up on January 20th to wrap up what's been a wild year of college football, to say the least.
I agree. And I will say this, too. I want to give my congrats to South Carolina football for an unbelievable season. The way that they lost, it never seen Shane Beamer that emotional in a game like that. But I think seeing that is going to fuel Carolina, their team, and the fans just to rally around them for next season. I think they're going to have a phenomenal season next year.
Yeah, going to be exciting 2025, and I think we're like 236 days away from kicking off
somewhere around
Virginia
there.
Tech. So long off season to dive into plenty of things with South Carolina football before that season does end up getting here. We'll come back, wrap up hour number 2 of the Extra Point. Streaming is the future of television and potentially the future of viewing sports, and a big story coming down yesterday on inching closer to something maybe a little more catered towards sports fans when it comes to streaming television. That's coming up next. It is the Extra Point. It's our head, Jalen Chart from WIS, hanging out on your Wednesday on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyra Head and Jalen Hart from WIS hanging out with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. Reminder, tomorrow morning, 7:30 on the early game, we're going to finally draw the winner of the Lawyer Lisa Special Teams Touchdown Contest. $1,300 up for grabs. If you've already signed up on 1075thegame.com, you're good. You're already entered. I think there's still time. If you head on over to 1075thegame.com and sign up before tomorrow morning for your chance to win $1,300 from our friends over at Lawyer Lisa for the Special Teams Touchdown Contest. Because guess what? Nobody scored a Special Teams touchdown this year for Carolina. They came darn close last week in the Citrus Bowl. If Kai Kroger floats that ball a little bit more for Boogie Huntley, we could have paid somebody last week. But we don't pocket the money for ourselves. We do ended up giving it away, and that's what we'll do coming up tomorrow morning on the early game.
That was a creative play design, and if he would have caught that, that would have been like one of the greatest plays in Carolina football history.
That's Beamer ball.
Yes.
That's Beamer ball, baby. Interesting week in the world of streaming television for sports/entertainment. Of course, you're a pretty big wrestling fan like myself. Yep. Monday night, we saw Monday Night Raw go to Netflix, the much anticipated move over to streaming. From what I saw, numbers were good. Was a good show overall, very well received, and really kind of the first entity from a weekly standpoint that's going to be featured on a streaming service in this sports/entertainment type of realm, which I really think sets the table for a lot of other leagues to potentially follow suit down the road.
I agree. The WWE on Netflix, Monday Night Raw on Netflix was fantastic show. Very good matches, even though it wasn't a whole lot of matches, but it was a good introductory to what the sports world could look like on a streaming platform. Now, granted, we have seen live games on Amazon Prime with football.
And what MLS does, like Apple TV and stuff like that. But nobody's found a permanent home exclusively on streaming yet.
Well, we could say that with Disney, because guess who owns a lot of Disney stuff? ESPN. And guess who's on a lot of ESPN stuff? The NBA.
Yeah.
We could see that.
And it's interesting because Disney yesterday officially bought Fubo TV.
Yep.
There's a lawsuit going on because Disney's been pushing for a sports-specific streaming service called Venue. Fubo did not like that because thought that infringed on them, so they launched an antitrust suit against Disney. Disney has now bought Fubo. We don't have a timetable yet, but it still seems like this sports-specific streaming service is coming somewhere down the line, which this is something that we've been talking about for a long time, I feel like, because streaming television, for one, it used to be really cheap, right? Like when I was in college, if you wanted Sling TV, it was like $20 a month. You didn't get 100 channels, but you got some solid ones, right? And if you were a sports fan, you got ESPN, ESPN2, the SC Network, those kind of things, and it was a good deal. As time's gone along, these prices go up and up and up to where everybody looks at it and says, well, is it justifiable for me to have streaming television and Netflix and Hulu and all these kind of things? Because now you're paying like $150 a month for everything.
Yeah, but I think with streaming, it does go hand in hand. Like it used to be with the WWE Network, used to be $9.99 for one point in time, and other platforms, Netflix was using the $9.99 method until the demand was going up, and now you have to raise your prices because a lot of more people were tuning in. You had more shows, and you had more other things that were coming to those platforms. But I think sports going to streaming is really going to amp up everything. Now that a lot of people are moving away from cable TV, they want more along with the streaming platform. So I think adding sports, I don't know what they're going to add. Hopefully, if they can figure out a way to add some NBA games to where you can stream it not only just on Hulu but on Disney Plus, that would be a game changer for professional sports, including the NBA.
Well, from what I understand about this Venue Sports thing, what they're kind of shooting for, and again, we don't have a specific price point, but I imagine it's not going to cost $70 like YouTube TV does or something like that, but you'd get all your ESPN channels, you'd get Fox Sports, Fox Sports 1, you'd get, I'm trying to think what else, CBS Sports.
NBC Sports.
NBC, you obviously get the major broadcast networks of NBC, CBS, Fox, and all those kind of things.
Spectrum.
Where if you are a serious sports fan and you want to watch every NFL game, you want to watch, every college football game, you want to watch, which the NBA is going to NBC coming up next year, making a return there, you're going to be able to see the majority of everything. Now, you're still going to probably have to have an additional streaming service or two for a few things, but for the most part, it sounds like they're trying to get it all encompassed in one, which again, I feel like we've been waiting for forever, because I don't know about you, I don't watch like regular TV channels a whole lot. Like, I'll put on The Office or something like that in the background while I'm doing some work, but mainly if my TV's on, it's usually on something sports related.
I still have DirecTV to this day. I've been having DirecTV since I was like 2 years old. So I have not only the streaming, I would stream on my phone. I would have something on my computer watching a game, and then I would have something on the regular cable if something was on, because if that's how invested I am with sports. I don't mind it if they could figure out a way to where you could multicast more game. The more, the better is basically my catchphrase for it. So that's my way of hooking me into streaming and stuff. If you give me more, the better my experience is going to be.
Yeah, well, and obviously if you don't have to pay an arm and a leg for it, that certainly helps. Well, like, I have Spectrum just because it's tied into the rent at my apartment. But if that wasn't the case, I wouldn't pay for normal broadcast television.
TV,
I would do something slimmer, more specific, and more with the focus on sports if I had the option.
The key to streaming, though, that a lot of people don't really see is when you switch, you do have an older audience that are used to using the cable, and that they having to be forced to go to streaming, and they may not know how to use it consistently like how the younger generation
Listen,
is.
I switched my parents over about a decade ago, so it takes time, but it can work.
Yeah, but for an older fan that you would want to see everything, that could be a little bit tricky, but it is worth it if they could be walked through the process of switching over. But kudos to Disney to buying Fubo TV, and that may save them or elevate their brand once this does happen. It says between 12 to 18 months when this deal could end. Or they could be finalized.
And that'll do it for today's edition of the Extra Point. Jalen, appreciate it, and we'll check in with you next week.
Awesome. Thank you.
Coming up next, Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on the Game. 11 o'clock on your Wednesday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you here, navigating through the first full week of the new year. Cold one at that. Hope you guys are staying warm. I believe they're declaring a state of emergency for later on in the week. So have we gotten our milk and bread? Are we good? Ready for the snow, ice, or whatever comes along? I've never understood the milk thing. Like bread I get. Milk to me is, I don't know.
Well, when your power goes out, it'll spoil.
Well, I guess you could stick it in the snow, right?
But then it's frozen.
True.
So you'd have to thaw your milk.
Somebody on the live stream said it's because kids want milk in their cereal. That can't be the reason.
I have no idea.
Nobody knows. I think milk and water is more appropriate.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Essential.
And, peanut butter, non-perishable things like that would last you if your power did go out for a couple days.
Go ahead, Wes.
I was say I've seen this song and dance before.
By the way, just me saying that, there's probably people already on the way to the store panic buying right now and preparing for the worst, even though
you're giving us a lot of power there, Tyler.
I know.
You think they listen to us to that extent?
Oh, of course they do.
So the chances of there actually being ice or snow whenever we have these big pre-events is normally like 5%. So
yeah,
I mean, be prepared, but you don't have to buy up all the milk and bread.
Very rarely, and in my lifetime, do I remember it being as bad or worse than advertised. Usually, it's something to a much lesser degree. But I'm sure they're going to close schools or something to that effect.
I was going to say that's the other lock. People will buy milk and bread. Lock number one. Lock number two. They'll cancel school and it'll be like sunny that day.
Well, and I feel bad for your kids now, Chris, because back in the day, we didn't have virtual learning. So when they canceled school, you were actually out of school. Now it's just like, okay, we'll just get on your laptop or iPad and we're going to do class that way.
Yeah, that is true. So, sometimes you get virtual learning. Sometimes you get nothing. But hey, I'll tell you who. I thought you were going to make. We had to walk through the snow to get to.
Uphill both ways. Somehow the hill was both ways each time. And
I'll tell you,
30 miles.
I'll tell you who will be used to. I'm not sure if he'll be here in time for the ice storm that's supposedly coming or not. Pottstown, Pennsylvania native Rasul Faison might be used to cold weather.
Somebody that's also spent the last couple of years out in Utah where they have a lot of snow there as well.
Right. He's fully prepared.
He is fully prepared, and he is officially a South Carolina Gamecock. Talked about him yesterday on his visit the other day with South Carolina, and didn't take long as he officially commits to the Gamecocks a little bit later on yesterday afternoon. As guys, we talked about a solid piece to add to your running back room, just a shy of 1,200 yards this past year at Utah State, and somebody that, like Rocket Sanders, can make guys miss.
Yeah, I love this guys. And, I think you looked at that position and you said, all right, is it going to be a true starter or is it going to be more of a depth guy? And, this is a kid that I think probably comes in, not that he's going to be promised anything, as Beamer has said over and over, but he probably looks at the situation and thinks, hey, I can come in here and prove I can be a top back at the SEC level. And, you watch his film, you look at his production. I mean, he's got everything. Like, he's done it all, I think, in terms of those things. But probably to check that final box, wanting, of course, I'd assume to go to the NFL, you want to prove you can do it at the Power 4 level. And so he's going to get that chance at South Carolina. Seems like a great fit. Seems like a guy who I believe will step right in kind of in that main group and push for a starting job and, has some experience, has some size, is actually bigger than he's listed, which is not always the case. And Chris, I think is a pretty dynamic runner, honestly. Like, he obviously has a different style than Rocket Sanders, but I think when you think about putting him in the backfield with the Lenora Sellers, this is definitely something that South Carolina fans can be excited about. And he now has, after committing yesterday, signed with South Carolina today as well.
Yeah, that's something in the portal era, Wes. People feel, first of all, you just want to make sure, hey, it is a guy actually signed, right? But we've seen, there's an example this portal cycle of a guy committing to South Carolina and then flipping that commitment almost immediately. Andrew Jones from South Carolina to Ole Miss, the linebacker. And so that's created kind of some half joking, half serious among the fan base of, okay, cool, a guy committed, is he going to sign, right? And normally, as usual, when a guy commits, he does sign, right? But I understand the reason for concern at times. I mean, the portal and the transfer wire is pretty crazy, right? But he has signed, no worries there. And I agree with you, really good get. I'm fascinated by this prospect because I shouldn't really say prospect, player. He's taken such an interesting route to get all the way here to South Carolina. Out of high school, I saw Wes, I was digging up some film. A lot of these guys you can't find film on. Rasul Faison actually does have a nice highlight tape from Utah State. If you want to go on YouTube, check it out. Highly recommend. I think he signed with Stony Brook out of high school. If you go on YouTube, there is a 7-year-old video of his high school highlights from Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Signed with Stony Brook, but he ends up going to junior college, spends some time at Marshall, back to junior college, Utah State for a couple seasons, and now South Carolina. And, despite that level of experience, 2 junior college stints, 2 college stints, obviously he's really taken off from a career standpoint last season at Utah State. It's his best year. 1,100 yards, big season, which earned him all the portal interest that he's gotten. I've been told, he's still got room to grow as a player. And I think you look at him as a prospect, there's a lot of, things to like there in terms of what he brings to the table. He's not a speed guy. I think his longest run at Utah State was 60 yards. His long this year was 37. But, man, this guy obviously moves the chains when you look at his yards per carry. You go kind of break down some of his chunk runs. You break down the amount of tackles he breaks. I mean, Rocket Sanders broke almost 50 tackles this season. Rasul Faison, I understand it's at a different level. He broke almost 70 last year. So this is a guy that really is a chain mover for you. And despite not maybe breaking off a bunch of 75-yard runs, not being someone you classify as a speed demon, he makes a lot of big plays and a lot of explosive plays at the college level.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note as well, he's got 22 receptions out of the backfield this past season, only 99 yards, so didn't do a ton with that. But when you look at Rocket Sanders and what he brought to the offense, look back to no later than the Missouri game with that long touchdown run that he got off the reception there that kind of cemented his legacy here at South Carolina. You're going to be looking for somebody in the backfield that can kind of fill that void in that way that Rocket Sanders leaves behind. And Attaway had a few catches out of the backfield as well this season, but Faison may be the one that kind of fills that void for that Rocket Sanders leaves behind next year.
Yeah, and I think, guys, Chris, you can speak to this too. That's something we've heard, that he is a pretty natural pass catcher as well. And I feel like he runs like a lot of NFL backs. Like the backs I see that have success in the NFL these days are very patient. They're able to catch the football out of the backfield. That's if you're going to be pass first, as a lot of NFL teams are, you have to be able to catch the football. I'm sure they'll probably want to clean up his pass protection a little bit in terms of that area, but in the passing game can help you. Has patience, and he may not be a top-end guy, but I do think he has a pretty high degree of explosiveness. So he maybe isn't going to run 22 miles an hour and outrun everybody, but he gets to top-end speed, which I think for running backs is far more important anyway. And then once he gets in the open field, if he gets space, he is a guy who will tack on that extra, kind of whatever's available there, he's going to tack on a little bit extra just by being able to make people miss and by having that good vision. So, if it's blocked for him to get to maybe the second level, he has the ability to turn it into a third level run just because he is pretty elusive, has some balance, kind of just has that little dead leg move, I feel like you'd call it, in his repertoire. And I don't know, I think there's a lot to like about him. I like him on the edge too, kind of like we talked about with Rocket. If you can get him outside, he can kind of make some things happen for you. I'm fascinated to see how this skill set sort of translates to the SEC level with a little bit bigger players, a little bit faster players, obviously, in some cases a lot faster players, but very fun highlight to watch.
Yeah, I mean, a few more just stats that stick out, and these are from PFF. To go to your point about explosiveness, again, this isn't a guy that you say, all right, he's going to come in the SEC and he's going to have a few 75-yard touchdowns next year. I mean, that's not something you really project. But what is projectable? Last year, 30 runs of 10 or more yards, 69 missed tackles forced, 757 of his 1,107 yards after contact. So if you look at his average yards after contact, he's averaging 3.84 yards after contact. So to your point earlier, Wes, if it's blocked, that's the mark of a good back, right? In the SEC, you're not every fan base wants, let's have a dominant offensive line. It's very hard to have a dominant offensive line in pass protection or the run game when you line up every week and you've got a few first-round picks normally across from you. You've got to have backs that can take something that's blocked for nothing or blocked for a yard and go get you 4, go get you 24, right? You got to have backs that when they get in the hole, singled up with a guy, that's your goal, right? If you can get your back one-on-one with a guy, you've really done your job from a schematic blocking standpoint. Can your guy make somebody miss? And it's been pretty hard for defenders to square up Faison. Now, I know naturally the where you go with it is, okay, yeah, I get that, Chris, but he's stepping up to the SEC. Yes. But there are a lot of players that if they have traits, can they successfully make that leap? I mean, Mario Anderson, he leaped from Newberry, not the Mountain West, Newberry to South Carolina, and he had some success, and he had a great year at Memphis this past year. Demetrius Knight, freak athlete, right? But he by far had his best collegiate season when he stepped up to the greatest competition that he played, which was at South Carolina, not Charlotte, not Georgia Tech. So I think it's about projectable traits. And while Faison doesn't have that elite speed, he is, I would say, more than above average in some other areas that you like to see in a running back.
And I tend to think, guys, if you can play, you can play. And I think the one thing that maybe hurts a guy from being projected to one level to the next is if there is an extreme lack of size or extreme lack of speed, and it's just like, all right, maybe this guy's natural athletic traits do not translate to the next level. So you could be, let's say, for example, maybe you could be a D2 center, but you're 5'10", 270 pounds, and maybe you have the best technique in the world. Try to go to the SEC, and it's just not going to work because you're just going to get outpowered. You're just get out leveraged. You're going to just get knocked back. But if you have sort of that baseline, those measurables that a lot of people kind of roll their eyes at, but there's a reason why every school, when they bring kids to camp, they sort of have a baseline measurable for what they're going to take at a particular position. As long as you can hit those baselines, I tend to think if you can play and be, not just play, but be extremely successful, as Faison has, 1,000-yard plus rusher, then I think you can make it happen at the next level. The only question I have is just to what extent. Like, he's going to be successful. It's just a matter of to what extent.
Well, we'll take a full stock of the running back room now that Rashul Faison has committed to South Carolina coming up next, and see if there's any more that they can add to it in the portal cycle. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Wednesday here in the game.
All right, guys, the beauty of our friends at Integrated Media is that, man, there's really no limit to what they can do at your home. The phone number, by the way, 803-948-8327. But whatever your audio-visual needs are, they've got solutions for you. Maybe you're Chris Clark and you want to just get a film watching room in one of the extra rooms in your house, and you just want to be able to watch Huddle on a projector screen with surround sound all day, every day. They can do that for you. Maybe it's something as simple as, just hanging a TV in the living room, getting ready for the big game, and you're just not comfortable doing that yourself. They can do that too. They can also do everything in between. And the beauty is also, if you go out to their location in Chapin, you can go experience all this stuff in person before you buy. If you want an idea of some of the stuff they've done in the past, just go to integratedmediainc.com right now and check it out. But if you're already ready, if you want to make that plunge, 803-948-8327.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West Chris along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Of course, reacting to the news that Rashul Faison committing South Carolina out of the transfer portal yesterday to add to the running back room that already features Oscar Attaway, Jordan Howell, and Matthew Fuller. And while none of those guys have the same, I guess, recognition as a Rocket Sanders had coming in from Arkansas, who, again, had established himself as one of the best backs in the SEC when he was healthy back in 2022. All four very solid pieces, and it's going to be interesting to see how the carries are divvied up, who kind of emerges through spring and through the summer, and certainly when the season rolls around. But a solid running back room, and one that might not be done yet in terms of adding guys to it, Chris.
Yeah, some very interesting pieces, right? Because you're going to go into this 2025 season with a mix. You know, you're going to have a mix of guys who are veteran. You're going to have a mix, some guys who are younger. Jawarn Howell, a player that myself and Wes and a lot of Gamecock fans very intrigued by, because he's a big kid who can run, was super productive at SC State. And he's going to be going into his third year of college football, but still in terms of playing experience, pretty young, right? Because he didn't get a ton of run this year. You got Matt Fuller, who we really didn't see, who's someone the staff liked a lot, and somebody that I think a lot of schools around the state of Georgia and some in the state of Georgia and some around the state of Georgia are kind of kicking themselves, saying, man, we probably should have taken this kid who rushed for 2,000 yards in back-to-back seasons in the Peach State in high school. We probably should have given him a bigger look. So I think you got to allow for the thought process of guys getting better. Howell, Fuller, those guys could, we don't know if they will, but they could take, a substantial leap next year. You got Oscar Attaway, who's played a ton of football for you, and I think had a really good game against Clemson last year and did some good things in the bowl game. You look at that group. Is there a Rocket Sanders in there? No. There's not a Rocket Sanders who's a 1,400-yard rusher in the SEC.
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet.
Optimism.
But do you have some potential there? Yes, because you've got Faison coming in, who has rushed for 1,100 yards in college. You do have Oscar Attaway, and you've got, I think, a couple young guys there who have a lot of promise and potential.
I mean, look at Faison himself, Chris, and you were detailing a little bit of his background. I mean, this guy has the credentials at this point, but it took a few steps. It took some growth. It took a while for him to get to that point. And I think, I don't know, guys, like the most intriguing part of the transfer portal era right now is everybody is looking, and when I say everybody, I'm talking about the schools, everybody's looking for instant impact, right? And it's, all right, which high school guys can help us right off the bat? Which transfer guys can help us right off the bat? There still is room for development, I think. And so I think one of the most difficult things to square up nowadays, especially when you go year to year and there's so much roster churn, is, all right, I think I know what this position is for this particular team, but there's still room for guys to make that big step forward, to make that big leap, to make that big jump. I particularly think about South Carolina's linebacking core when I think about things from that standpoint, but I think it applies to the running back room as well. What does a guy like Jawarn Howell look like 6 months from now? What does Matt Fuller look like 6 months from now? How does that compare to a guy like Faison who, as Chris said, also there's some upside here as well. I think these portal guys in general, you are looking for somebody to come in. If you take a transfer, you're looking for some impact right away. However, a lot of these guys have still some upside to go. I look at a guy like Boaz Stanley who commits from Troy. I mean, he still has at least 2 years of eligibility, maybe 3 years of eligibility left, so there's room for him to continue to grow. Sean Murphy at linebacker, still a guy who hasn't played a ton. Aaron Nolan has not played any college ball. I mean, you look at this group, it's not just about immediate impact for your transfers, but also, again, to go back to it, development is still a part of college football success for a team, I think.
I want to go back to Matthew Fuller. We've brought him up a couple times here, and Chris, you mentioned what he did in high school at Georgia with those great couple seasons to round things out there. Remind people, because again, we only got to see him take a handful of carries against Akron. Remind people what he brings to the table and why this staff is so excited about what he can bring to this running back room.
Well, and I'm going to steal something Wes talks about a lot, but since you asked me and not him, I mean, you look at Matt Fuller. He's just a big dude, like that's what stands out right off the bat. You could watch his film in high school and go, okay, this kid looks like he's got some size. But, I remember when the first pictures of him came out after he signed and enrolled with South Carolina, it's like, geez, like people were passing him around like, look at this guy. You know, he's 5'11", 225. So, you know, he's a load. And his senior year, 256 carries, 2,086 yards. He played for Jabo Shaw at Wayne County, who's Connor Shaw's brother. 8.1 yards per carry and 27 touchdowns. And the previous year, I said back-to-back 2,000-yard seasons. Little bit of an exaggeration, but he only rushed for 1,757 yards and 22 touchdowns as a junior. So not quite 2,000, but great seasons, right? And just kind of flew a little bit under the radar as a recruit. But I do remember, Wes, he did battle an injury towards the back half of the season. He was on some of those SEC injury reports as being either limited or even out for some games, as I recall. But I remember when he got to Carolina and enrolled, there was a lot of buzz behind the scenes, like in some scrimmage situations about, hey, Matt Fuller's showing some things. So, again, that's a guy we haven't seen yet. But we'll certainly see him starting in spring ball, and he's going to have every opportunity to make some noise.
Yeah, and when we talk about him being big, it's not just, he weighs this. I mean, just physically put together, kind of the wide legs that you're looking for, just has the frame to be a power back at this level. And, I think the thing about development too, and the thing that is unpredictable is it fully depends on that kid. It's really it's not really about talent at this point with any young guy on this roster. Who goes into this offseason and just says, I'm ready to be a starter, and just works their tail off and takes the spot, like says, you know what, I want to be one of these guys. Because, you can really only play two running backs, in my opinion. Now, if somebody gets banged up, you can kind of insert that third. But for the most part, in a given game, there's only enough carries for two guys to really get settled in and carry the football a lot. And so who just says, I don't care who's transferring in, I don't care who's leaving, who's coming in, anything in between, I'm going to be the guy, and just takes it and runs with it, so to speak. That's what you cannot sort of predict, because it just depends on those individual players.
Let's look at your running back room as we sit right now heading into the 2025 offseason. And, of course, still an opportunity to add more to it in the transfer portal as well. We'll take a look at somebody that officially announced his return to South Carolina for 2025 coming up tomorrow, and what he brings to the table on offense in year number 2. Coming up next, reminder tonight, men's basketball taking on number 5 Alabama. Pregame coverage starting at 6:30 for a 7 o'clock tip here on the Game in Columbia, as well as 100.3 The Game out in Myrtle Beach. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the Game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris. Along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game, talking all things transfer portal a little bit earlier on in the show. But, of course, as we like to remind you, it's just as important retaining the talent that you have as it is getting new talent out of the transfer portal. And yesterday, another big name officially announcing his return to South Carolina via his new deal with the Garnet Trust, that being Mazio Bennett, who came in as a true freshman and really turned a lot of heads, especially early on in the season with his immediate impact at that slot position, and a guy that we're all going to be very excited to see what he does as a sophomore next year.
Yeah, played well as we expected. I think he was a guy you always sort of knew he could impact in year one. It was just a matter of what does that look like? What do the numbers look like? And, he was such a developed wide receiver already. I think that helped him in terms of his route running. Obviously has good hands, hard worker, all those things. We'll see what type of jump he can make from year one to year two. But I think this opens the door for a conversation about the receiving core. And I have become more and more of the mindset. So we've talked quite a bit. Can you add that sort of what we've been calling that true X, like a true number one, if you're talking about in NFL terms, like a wide receiver one to this receiving core, and then everybody else maybe takes a step down and the overall just the group gets better. Those guys, and I want to get your take on this too, Chris, those guys are few and far between, I feel like, in the transfer portal that are true just difference makers. Now, they are out there at wide receiver, not impossible to find, but they are going to command quite a bit of cash money. So I've started to wonder if you're South Carolina, and if you're talking about resources and roster building and things like that, are you a little bit better off trusting that position with a guy like Mike Ferry, who's proven already he can develop talent, and seeing all this young talent you're bringing in at wide receiver, that is a position you can play early if you're physically ready and if you work hard, and just saying, hey, maybe we're better off spending our resources elsewhere, getting an extra player either on the defensive line or at linebacker or somewhere like that, versus sort of overpaying what somebody's asking for you at wide receiver?
I think, we've spent the offseason talking about how South Carolina is better positioned from an NIL standpoint. And I think because of that, and because of the fact that you do look at the receiver room and say, hey, there's some work to be done to continue to get better there, it's very natural to go, all right, we'll go out and get one of those big timers that you're talking about, Wes. But what you don't want to do, we know the market, the NIL market is inflated from what it was last year. I think if you want to simplify it, you can kind of take what guys were getting last year and double it. Like that's the simplest way to do it. You can even triple it. Will that sustain over the next few years? Maybe not, but that's what it is right now. What you don't want to do is overcommit yourself from an NIL standpoint in bringing in players that you're not 100% sure are better than what's on your roster, right? If you find a no-brainer that makes sense within an NIL budget, sure. But you don't want to, let another school spend all their NIL money getting a guy that's, a good player, but not a difference maker. Go get a difference maker at another position. Go bolster your depth at another position. So I agree with you. And man, you look at the receiver room last year. I mean, Mike Furry, Mazio Bennett, right? We knew he was going to play early because he's advanced as a player in terms of his just route running, his knowledge. He has a high IQ. But still, to go get a guy ready to make plays in the SEC in year one, who's not just some freak athlete, that takes some development. And that's what they did with Mazio. Even Delvon Campbell, 6-year guy, but he got better throughout the season to where he was playing his best ball at the end of the year. The best example, guys, is Nick Carber, who looked, in my mind, like almost a completely different player from what he was year one to year two. Now, part of that is just, a lot of times you take a jump from year one to year two, especially with someone like Nick, who was not a finished product high school wide receiver with years of experience. But I think you can very clearly see the trajectory. And, this is a freshman class that's very talented. 6 guys, 5 of them on campus to go through spring ball. The other one, who some people may think may be the best, and Donovan Murph, will enroll in the summer. And so this does allow you an opportunity to go through, see what you have in spring ball. You've got a mix of returners and new guys. I think the returners have upside still. The freshmen have upside, of course. Go see what you've got, reassess things, and then you can go out in the spring window if you need in the portal and go get somebody. And I know that limits you because you are banking on that one portal window that's a 10-day window. But the Gamecocks did go get a couple guys, Delvon Campbell and Vendrevius Jacobs, in the last spring portal window this past offseason. So I think they're leaving some flexibility there, and see how this current room develops too.
And that is an important thing to note. There is another portal cycle coming up in the spring, or you can add some more pieces later on down the line. And based on, y'all's coverage of who's been on campus and who has been in serious consideration for South Carolina, really kind of the only wide receiver that really sticks out is Casey Concepcion, who committed to Texas A&M ultimately about a day ago. And again, you have a lot of guys in the room right now, got a lot of guys coming in as freshmen. So I think, like you said, Chris, it's an opportunity to really assess what you have, and then after the springtime say, okay, here's what we probably need to add based on what we see so far with, and again, Harper's not going to be in spring practice because the track stuff, but based on Mazio Bennett, based on what these guys coming in as true freshmen do and bring to the table, and then kind of go from there, it seems like.
Yeah, and I think, guys, you're going to quickly sort of have an idea in spring practice, I think, at wide receiver, which of those guys you can at least start to project a little bit in terms of what they could be this season, because again, it's not a position that requires the physicality that playing on the offensive line or playing on the defensive line does. Like, you take a guy like Malik Clark, who I think, because of the way his recruitment played out, has almost been overlooked a little bit, just what this guy is capable of. I mean, you're talking about nearly 6'3". He probably had the best numbers at the Under Armour camp last offseason before his senior year in terms of the combination of verified speed, measurables, and height. Like, this is a guy on paper. Do you want to put this on him in year one? Of course not. But on paper, he has true number one receiver upside, number one receiver ability. But you just go down this list. I tend to think it's one of the most asked questions we've had on Gamecock Central. Who do you think of this group can play early? And how did they fit in? I think that question is very difficult to accurately answer. Just like last year, it was very difficult going into the season to pinpoint what the rotation was going to be at wide receiver. However, the good thing for Carolina is there's enough talent in that group that you look at it and you say, maybe we can't predict which 2 or 3 guys of the freshman group are going to just come in, instantly show they can play. However, there's enough that you feel like a couple of them will do so. It's just a matter of figuring out which 2 or 3 those will be.
Absolutely. Again, the wide receiver room going to be a story to chase or follow along the entire offseason, especially spring practice rolls along here in a couple of months. Tomorrow afternoon, mid-afternoon game, late afternoon game that is, women's basketball taking on Texas A&M. Tip-off at 5 o'clock, pregame coverage starting at 4:30 on our sister station, 98.5 WOMG. Stalin City's crew playing their 3rd game of the conference slate so far tomorrow afternoon, taking on the Aggies. Going to be without Ashton Watkins, by the way, for the rest of the season, as she did suffer a torn ACL after tweaking her knee on Sunday against Mississippi State. So it'll be interesting to see how the team fares without her starting tomorrow. Come back, wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Another Gamecock veteran heading to the Senior Bowl here in a couple weeks. With that coming up next, Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the Game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris along with you on your Wednesday, wrapping things up here. We'll get into a little bit of the Orange Bowl preview coming up tomorrow as Penn State and Notre Dame take each other on down in Miami to see who goes and plays for the national championship. But a couple weeks from now, the Reese's Senior Bowl out in Mobile is going to be an opportunity for a lot of guys to get in front of NFL scouts for an entire week and show what they have one last time in a college type of setting for heading off the NFL draft here in a couple months. A couple Gamecocks already set to go there, and Demetrius Knight and Kyle Kennard, and yesterday officially announced TJ Sanders going to be joining them out there as well. And he's a guy that we've talked about a lot through the entire season, and particularly as the season came to a close, the value that he could bring to NFL teams. And when you look at draft boards, a lot of people have him valued pretty high as one of those interior defensive linemen that may not be waiting too long to hear his name called.
Yeah, TJ has always been a guy ever since he arrived at South Carolina that the upside was pretty obvious. And I think we've seen him sort of progress to the point where that's shown on the field. I think last year was kind of a breakout year for him. This year, maybe even stronger when you look at what he and really all those interior guys did for South Carolina. And I'm very curious, Chris, I want to get your take too, man. Who's the first guy off the board for South Carolina this year in the draft? I think, you look at what Nick Emmanwori did throughout his 3 years at South Carolina. I mean, he's been the more kind of consistently dominant guy for sure, but as we know, all positions are not created equal. Defensive tackles, and particularly just interior defensive linemen that can move the way TJ can, those guys are going to be highly, highly coveted at the NFL level. So who do you got going first? And obviously it could change 10 times back and forth between now and the draft.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it is important for – we've seen guys go out to the Senior Bowl and do really well and raise their stock. I mean, Deebo Samuel comes to mind as someone who had plenty of buzz, but he went out to the Senior Bowl and was dominant, ended up raising his stock even more and done pretty darn well for himself throughout his NFL career. And, when you look at the guys that Carolina has going to the Senior Bowl, Kennard, Sanders, Knight, those are certainly guys that could go out there. They're thought of pretty highly now. They could go raise their stock even more. Nick Emmanwori is a guy that can continue, I think, to raise his stock based on, you think about Nick Emmanwori in testing, right? Seems like he's going to do pretty well in a combine setting, and then you go turn on the tape, right? Sometimes, Wes, it's hard to tell based on like projections and buzz. There are so many mock draft services now. Even some of the highly regarded ones have a hard time pegging guys. There are some obvious ones, right? Like that guy's a first rounder. But sometimes you'll see guys in the high rounds this early in the process that maybe it's not truly an accurate reflection. So I'm really not trying to filibuster. I think Nick E.
You're doing a great job of it, though.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm trying to give some context.
That's that political science background, Chris.
That's right. That's right. I think the guys you hear the most about in high rounds are probably Nick E. and Kyle Kennard. I think a lot of people look at Kennard and go, okay, he won the Nagurski. He had a great season. He should be a first-round pick. But it's not always that simple. I think even in the midst of a huge season for Kennard, he was still like, hey, he's a second, he's a third type of guy. I do think it'll probably end up being either Kennard or Nick Emmanwori. I don't know if I'm super convicted on one or the other. I may go Kennard just because he plays the edge position, but one of those two, I would say.
Well, I was going to say real quick, so you're convinced it's going to be one of those two over TJ?
Right now. And TJ's interesting, man, because he has positional versatility, right? I've talked to some people that say he can go play end in a 3-4 in the NFL, which is true. He could do either of those. So, I mean, I could see him going out to the Senior Bowl, having a great week, and ending up being the first guy off the board. To me, Wes, I think another interesting question is, will Carolina have a first rounder? That's another interesting question to me, and I don't think that's a lock. I do think Carolina could break their record or at least tie it for all-time number of draft picks. I think that was 7, more than 10 years ago or so. Just a lot of fascinating storylines with the draft for them this year.
Oh, and going back to TJ, when you're playing the interior defensive line, yeah, there's some guys that are just bona fide game wreckers that really stand out when you watch film, when you look at the stat sheet. But for a guy like TJ, it is almost kind of an under-the-radar type of thing where, again, his stats don't pop off the page the same way that a Kennard does or some of these other guys at other spots on defense, that the light gets shined on them a little bit more. But, again, what he does on the interior when it comes to run stuffing and those kind of things are things that when he gets in this Senior Bowl type of environment with scouts and with people that, obviously coach at the NFL level, seeing his mechanics, seeing him run through drills and obviously play in the game at the end of the week, that's where those things are going to kind of show up and potentially raise his draft stock even more if it can go up even more.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point too, Chris, about the position versatility. I mean, they won't have to go far back to see film of TJ playing some of that end in a 3-man front when Carolina was in those 3-3-5 looks. I remember, I think it was maybe 2 springs ago as well when Carolina was kind of experimenting with what they wanted to be on defense. TJ, when we were out there, played a ton of kind of end, and I think he's got the athleticism to do that. And he's always looked like an NFL guy to me, just from a size and athleticism standpoint. You go all the way back to his ability as a basketball player in high school. Like, I always look at that for big guys, especially on the defensive front. Just that bounciness, the ability to run the court. If it shows up there, typically, if you have the other traits, that translates over pretty well to football, and you see that with TJ. So I think the real interesting thing for this South Carolina team is going to be not just how many guys get drafted this season, but how many guys, when we look back on this defense, the guys that were on the field this year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when everybody has had an opportunity to potentially get drafted, how many guys from this team, specifically that defense, end up being drafted in the end is going to be a massive number.
Yeah, remember that, that it gets passed around a lot, the 2010 Alabama game where, the screenshot of South Carolina's starting defense for that game, and just not everybody went to the league, but a bunch of guys did. And the ones who didn't were, veteran, really solid players. So, yeah, I mean, I go back to that, man. Not just guys from, I think you make a good point, like future guys that can be drafted too, but even the ones who are gone, early defection with Eamon Worry and Sanders, or the guys who are just out of eligibility and going, like a Kennard, they're going to have a lot of draft picks, and it's going to be obviously very heavy on the defensive side.
So congrats, DJ Sanders, again joining Demetrius Knight and Kyle Kennard out there at the Reese's Senior Bowl coming up at the end of this month. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show of myself, Terry Ford, up next on your Wednesday here on The Game.